agenda for Select Board. I'll ask for a roll call.
Kevin Kyra here.
Greg Bendel here.
Lilia Maselli here.
Frank West here.
Gary DePalma here. I'll ask you all to rise.
Salute the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First on our agenda is in the communications.
Under communications, we have, the board has a letter from Susan Inman, the Assistant Town Manager, HR Director, expressing her interest in the position of the interim town manager. She notes she's worked for the town for the past 18 months, is in part responsible for the town's $13 million insurance budget, has onboarded 61 employees since she's been here, participated in collective bargaining. Notes she has 14 years of experience in municipal government and then 20 years in the private sector. Has a master's in public administration from Suffolk University, a Bachelor of Arts from Boston College, and an associate's degree from the Catherine Gibbs School. She also is a Massachusetts Certified Public Purchasing Officer and a certified professional with the Society of Human Resources Management.
Thank you, Mr. Hall.
Under board to consider is execution of a conservation restriction. This is for Darby Lane, the property off of Hopkins Street. You'll recall this is a 17-unit subdivision. It is part of the conservation subdivision provisions within the zoning bylaw, and as such, one of the requirements is that this property, essentially the property in exchange for a greater density of housing, the proponent is required to set aside property for open space, which the developer has done. And in this case, the board is being asked to sign off on the conservation restriction. The Conservation Commission will also need to do the same. Once that is complete, then the developer will send this back to the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs for their review and final sign-off, and then once that happens, the developer records this with the Registry of Deeds. So there's, as you see from the memo from Valerie Gingrich, the Planning and Conservation Director, she has no concerns with the board signing off on this.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we grant the request.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor? So moved.
Next, under board to consider is the appointment of Susan L. Inman, Assistant Town Manager, HR Director, as temporary town manager.
Chairman, may I make a comment? I wondered if it was advantageous for us to have discussion if you would entertain discussion before the votes. I notice under appointments, we don't have discussion, just in the spirit of transparency and trying to, obviously stay within the rules of the open meeting law. The only opportunity we have to discuss this is right here in these meetings, so if it's okay with you, as long as the discussion is about these items, I wondered if you'd be okay if we had, made some questions, asked some questions, made some comments before we entertain a vote.
I have no problem with that. I was going to ask for discussion anyways.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chair, I might as well kick it off since no one else wants to jump in the water. Quite frankly, I don't know what we're doing here this evening, since we decided at our last meeting we would meet again August 14th. But with that said, at our last meeting, we all agreed that the timeline was too aggressive, too fast, and that we needed to slow down. Tonight's agenda is just the opposite. It's more aggressive and more fast. We all agreed that we would first establish a search and screen committee and that we would come back on August 14th with our nominees. We agreed that we would allow time and opportunity for the search committee to select a chairperson, develop a criteria, and begin the process of finding a new town manager. If this vote tonight is about a transition plan, I would think appointing the current assistant or a department head, which I am in favor of, would not require much of any transition at all. Maybe 2 weeks in the month of October would be plenty of time for such a transition. Delaying this vote would allow the search committee an opportunity to provide us with their opinions and recommendations. We have assembled 9 individuals who are very talented, and I, for one, would like to hear from them. I am uncomfortable rushing through this process with both board to consider items 7 and 8. If we were to follow the draft in our packet, Town Manager Search Screen Committee Charge, this draft that we received, which completes the process by September 25th, then why are we here tonight on July 31st voting on agendas 7 and 8? This is the most important decision that we are going to make. We are responsible for 3 hires: the chief financial officer, town council, and the town manager. I served on the hiring process for both the chief financial officer and town council. I believe Mr. Bendel did as well. And I'm proud of those hires. We had input from the search committee. We received resumes. We made reference calls to prior employers. We spoke to department heads and employees. We vetted the hires, and we reviewed them, and we did a fine job. Just a reminder that the person who we're looking at as the temporary town manager, let me just say this: the agenda names the individual, and I've never seen that before, naming the individual for an appointment. Even when we had the town manager's appointment, it just said appointment of town manager or review of town manager contract. But let me remind my colleagues that the individual that is listed here, Susan Inman, was not a finalist for the assistant town manager's job. She was not selected. Tonight's agenda is not allowing the process to take place. This agenda, as written, is a foregone conclusion. Why even have a search committee? By taking this vote and naming Susan Inman temporary town manager, you will be stifling the ability of the search committee from doing their job. You will be sending a clear signal to other town managers of smaller communities wanting to come up to a larger community, assistant town managers, department heads, and other municipal and state administrators: don't bother to apply. By voting favorably on this board to consider 7 and 8, then you have agreed to give Ms. Inman the salary she's demanding, $170,000, a 34% increase. I say this because I met with Susan Inman at her request, and I don't know how many of you had that same request. And she made it clear that she would not accept anything less. Her current salary, and this is all public, is $127,000 and scheduled to go up to $137,000, a $10,000 raise by our town manager in January. Was that budgeted? I'm not sure. But we need to be careful because we need to consider Mr. Hull's buyout as part of the budget. I know that there's a salary line item in the budget that covers retirees, but still it's our responsibility to be within the budget. I, for one, am not wanting to give up my management rights. when it comes to negotiations. And by her demand of $170,000 or nothing is giving up our management rights. I'm not one to be held hostage for a vote. She also made it clear that come October 31st, if she wasn't the temporary town manager, she would be fine staying in the assistant town manager's position and not moving up. That is troubling to me. We went in circles at that meeting. I said to her, if Mr. Hull leaves and there's not a temporary town manager, you would be the acting or the interim town manager. And she said, no, it would be up to you to hire a temporary town manager. I will not do that. And I said, well, when the number one person leaves, the number two person steps up. And she said she doesn't have to do that. She's comfortable as the assistant town manager and will maintain that position. That, again, is troubling. If the reason for the vote tonight is about the budget process that generally begins November 1st, we need not worry because I have, and we should all have, full confidence in our Chief Financial Officer, Brian Perry, and the department heads that a budget will be prepared and presented on time. In my conversations with Ms. Inman, and to her credit, she admitted her deficiencies in finance and budgeting. I certainly would prefer a town manager or a temporary town manager with a financial background. There is no need to rush this very important decision. Just because someone has the title of assistant town manager doesn't necessarily mean that that individual should be the town manager. Tonight should be about the search committee, approving the nominees, having Beverly send out an email to get a consensus of availability for their first meeting. I think a vote in favor of Agenda 7 and 8 is a mistake at this time and detrimental to the success of the search committee. I truly believe that this appointment, if it goes through, will affect the search committee's ability to do their job. That's all I have to say right now.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I just wondered if it made sense for us to, well, as I look at this, I feel like number 10 is the low-hanging fruit here. I wondered if we could if you would be willing to take 10 out of order, because I feel like a lot of the discussion hinges on this committee being formed, and I think we haven't formally done that yet. And, you know, I feel more comfortable if we could vote on that, and then perhaps we could circle back.
With all due respect, Mr. Chair, I get it. But I'm going to make a motion to take no action on board to consider 7 and board to consider 8.
Do I have any other,
I'll just,
Conversations?
yeah.
Well, you have a motion.
yeah, but,
For discussion,
yeah, we're in discussion.
yeah. So,
Pardon me?
She seconded the motion.
You
second
seconded it.
discussion. So, I too agree that we should focus on the committee first, informing that committee. I think that should be the focus first before the assistant town manager appointment. I also feel like we are putting the cart before the horse with that. I think, personally, I think we get the committee to get together, let them, get appointed, as Mr. Kyra said, Bev, go to them, get a date, let them get together, let them get a committee, come back to us, let us know what's going on. Mr. Hull's here till the 31st of October. I don't see the rush in doing this now on July 31st. Ms. Inman is assistant town manager. She's here. She covers for Mr. Hull when he's not. I don't know what the procedure, maybe attorney, good evening, Fair can answer this question, if that's okay, through the chair, that if this board does not appoint an assistant town manager prior to Mr. Hull's last day, does Ms. Inman automatically become acting town manager November 1st? Or can we, put that in place? I'm just curious. I'm just kind of asking how that process would work if we didn't appoint someone prior to that.
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. So if there is no, the charter calls for the appointment of a temporary town manager by this board once there's a vacancy in office. There's not a vacancy, obviously, as long as Mr. Hull is still here.
Right.
But once he's no longer here, you'll have a vacancy in the office of town manager. While you do have assistant town manager as a position, there's no, within the charter, which is where all the town manager's authority derives, in this case, there is no provision for an assistant town manager, taking that authority. It's more of a organizational construct that we have here and can temporarily serve and sort of mind the store, so to speak, while the town managers stay away on vacation. But it wouldn't rise to the level of now automatically becoming town manager. You'd need somebody to hold that title
Yep.
and that would have the authority to execute the authority that's set within the charter.
Okay, thank you. So I just think that while I think we, at some point, obviously need to know who will be the acting town manager prior to Mr. Hull's leaving, that was just worst-case scenario. I was just wanting to know that. Obviously, I would want to appoint somebody. I just don't think it needs to be right now, tonight. I'm not ready to vote on this tonight, so I support tabling 7 and 8. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I guess we all kind of had a discussion, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the discussion we had was involving Ms. Inman and as far as, being the temporary town manager. And again, I don't know that that necessarily was the exclusive consensus of the board, but I guess my question is that, well, a couple of questions. One, if we didn't offer Ms. Inman the town manager, the temporary town manager job, or interim town manager job, what's our plan for an interim town manager? Are you looking for this committee to create both an interim town manager and a town manager? Because that's not the charge of what's written here. This is just to look to seek out a new town manager, correct?
Mr. Chair? Yeah, thank you. I tend to agree with some of the comments that have been made by Mr. Kyra and Ms. Maselli, because I, for one, am impressed with this group of individuals, a highly qualified, highly impressive group of individuals that we've assembled. I look forward to supporting them. I'm quite frankly surprised how quickly we were able to assemble this team, if you will, and which I think is a really good news for us, is positive, and that we ought to take that opportunity to turn to this group and ask them, first of all, when are they available to organize, and two, would they be so willing to give us input on such a major decision, as we've done in the past, as was mentioned by Mr. Kyra, for other appointments that we've made by this board, town council, and the town accountant, if I remember correctly. I too, there was referenced earlier, I think it's page 2 of this draft document, where it references, and I'm not sure who developed this, but it expects the committee will do their work from the September 6th to the 25th. Well, I guess that does beg the question, why do we need an interim if the plan is to have somebody in place? Now, granted, it takes a while for a person to accept a job, give notice. I understand that. But I think we've assembled a great team, and I think we ought to get as much input as they're willing to give us. Because, quite frankly, I'm grateful that the person that I asked said yes, because I didn't really know what to ask that person, what they were signing up for.
Yes.
And I made that pretty clear, and this person was still, and I would imagine there was a few conversations like that, if I had to guess. So I think we ought to turn to this group, and if they're willing to give us advice, then we ought to alter what it says for number 10, and I'm willing to make, once the other motions are completed, that we ask them to organize and give us as much feedback as they can, because I think we have a lot of valuable input. I know some of the gentlemen are here tonight, but I think we ought to utilize this fine group.
Mr. Chairman? To that point, I think the issue would be are you suggesting that we ask that committee to come up with recommendations for an interim town manager as well as a permanent town manager.
If I can answer this question
Yep.
directly,
Go ahead.
I have no problem with that, because I didn't foresee, you know, I asked a couple times here, are we gonna meet again? And when we left here, it didn't look like we were gonna, it looked like everything was gonna be off till August 14th. Now, we have a unique opportunity where this group is ready to be voted on here tonight, I hope it will be passed. And once it is, it's up to them to get together and formalize, and
But-
we could turn around as soon as they're available and say, what do you think about this interim solution? And we still have time.
But doesn't that create the same problem in that, let's say that this subcommittee, or this committee votes to have Sally Smith as the interim town manager, and Sally Smith applies for the town manager job, the permanent town manager job, aren't, to select board member Kyra's point, aren't they now skewing, potentially skewing the vote?
Well, one of the things that I would just want to respond to that, Mr. Chair, is that what's really important to me, and one of the first things I would be asking the committee, if they'd be so willing, is that I think they should be handling all the applications that they come in. They should be the ones that are in receipt of anything that comes in. And then anybody who currently works for the town, who may be interested in the position, should remove themselves from that portion of this. And, so that we're completely transparent, we have that on the up and up, and I'm not suggesting there would be any wrongdoing. I want to be clear about that, but I just think that it's the right thing to do, to remove anybody who's interested in this position going forward is removed from any HR type of work.
How have we done, I'm just curious, when, Jeff, if you don't mind, or, through the
Give me
chair.
a second first,
Oh, sure.
please. Starting out with the town manager search committee, the draft we have, it's a draft. Dates were in there that I knew they weren't gonna be right, but I wanted to get a draft out there so that we could see what we have to do, and we can start discussing timelines, and at least know where we're gonna be going with something like this, again, pertaining to timelines. But, go ahead, Frank.
No, I guess what I was asking is that from prior experience, when Mr. Hull got appointed as town manager, when former town manager Mike Kyra retired, or gave notice of retirement, how did we do that? As far as,
Which time? He went for the job twice, right? First, when he first came on the job? a couple
well,
years.
I guess probably both. I mean, I think the first time, if I'm not mistaken, I think he was made interim town manager for a year, and then was somehow selected as town
So
manager.
in-
But more recently, I was curious about how Mr. Hull transitioned, just to give kind of a basis on what we've done in the recent past here.
I wasn't on the board, but my guess of the transition was 20-plus years of working alongside.
Well, so.
No, but
so
what was
just-
the process, I guess?
Just to speak to the first instance, when I was the assistant town manager and Buzz Stepchinsky left, I applied for the position. There was a process, I don't recall, there was a screening committee at the time, but I don't recall meeting with the screening committee, but I did meet with the Board of Selectmen at the time, and ultimately, Mike Kyra was selected as the, I think it was interim or acting town manager, and served in that role, as I recall, for a year, and then became town manager. And then, more recently, in 2012, when Mike Kyra announced his retirement, again, I don't think there was, there may have been a discussion. I think there may have been, I don't recall the particulars, but there was not a formal search process. It wasn't posted. I expressed interest in the position, and the board at the time agreed to hire me in that role as town manager.
And Mr. Chair, to that point, I think Mr. West is leading to a good question. The answer is, there really is no formal process
Right.
that's been done in the last 40, 50 years almost. We're kind of cutting the mold here.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Go ahead.
So, going back to Frank's question about, will the committee appoint a interim? I'm not looking to them to appoint an interim, but I would look to them to give us some feedback, maybe some opinions. I mean, ultimately, it's going to be our decision, just like with hiring the town manager. So it may not be in the charge, but there's, their focus is gonna be on hiring a new town manager. But I don't think there's a lot of, the 9 people that we've assembled here, I think have a lot of, knowledge in this domain and in different parts of it, and I think they can, they've seen a lot, I think they know the town very well, and I think they may be able to offer some input. I'm not looking for them to give me names, personally. I'm looking for maybe some input, maybe some qualifications, things like that. I think that's a bonus in it. But again, I'm just gonna go back to that, I'm not ready to do this, I think it's too far out. And I do think on Mr. Carr's point, and someone else had mentioned this to me before, similarly, where you were saying, okay, we have Susan come in as temporary town manager tonight. I do think that scares off a lot of candidates. And I think that's normal. I think even knowing, let's just say she was an interim town manager and it was known that she was going for the job, that might scare off people too. So, I mean, I think it can go, it's gonna be what it's gonna be. I think what we need to do for the interim person is have the right person in there for the transition. I'm kind of piqued by Mr. Bendel's suggestion that if anybody does wanna go for the town manager role, they should remove themselves from, that position or, going for that position. I'm certainly gonna think about that a little harder. No, it's a very good point.
What
Well, I just
position
wanted
would
to
that be?
clarify, if I could just clarify, Mr.
I
Chair.
don't mean leave the position, I
Yeah,
mean,
just meaning like.
interim.
The applications are
interim,
coming
yes.
in, HR work.
yes, yes. Well, they shouldn't be privy to it if they're gonna apply.
But if I could just reply to her, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that, because I agree with you. The last 2 weeks, I've felt really self-conscious about that, and that I'm not completely comfortable with this vote tonight on July 31st, just that 30-some-odd days since the manager gave us his notice he was gonna retire. And in the last couple of days, I've kind of come to the grips with it, that,
Yeah.
okay, Greg, you might be criticized for that, but I'm okay with the fact that this is the biggest decision we're gonna make.
Yeah.
And it's okay if we need a little more time to do it. To Mr. West's point, there really hasn't been anybody has done this in the last
Yeah.
5 decades. So, sorry if we need a few more minutes to make sure we get it right. So I want to tell you that I feel the same way.
Yeah, and I don't think, and I would hope that Ms. Inman, I'm sure, feels that way. Like, this is not personal to anybody. I don't take it personal. I don't feel that I'm putting or calling anybody out. To me, like you said, this is a huge decision. It's hopefully whatever decision we make and the person we put in this place will be here for a very long time and do a wonderful job. That's the goal here. So to me, I'm focused on choosing the right person for the town manager job, but also who's going to do it in the interim. And I think there are a lot of things we have to look at there, again, to bring up your point about the HR thing. Like, there's just, and I think that's what the committee can help us to because I did not think at that point. And I think those are the conversations I think we need to have, like we are now, to bring those out and get everybody thinking. But yeah, it's too soon. I just don't think it's needed to tonight. I think we should focus on the committee and get that committee going, because that committee, they're gonna have a conversation and come up with, their own process, and they'll come up with a timeline on what they think they're gonna need to, and what truly is, a respectable timeline on when they think they could actually hire someone and get someone in. I feel like we're going blind right now.
Oh, but,
Mr. Chair,
Chairman?
could I?
Excuse me.
No, go ahead, Jeff.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So one of the reasons some of these board to consider items are on here, and I've had several conversations with the chair in preparing the agenda, there seemed at the last meeting of the board some desire, although it was not completely clear, as to whether there was some suggestion that the permanent town manager should not be hired until after the town meeting, annual town meeting, until the budget process was played out, so to speak, and then the next town manager should be brought in. So clearly, if that approach were to be taken, there would have to be someone serving in that role between November 1st and town meeting, annual town meeting is May 4th, so say June 1st for the sake of argument, serving in that period, in that role during that period. So if there was going to be an interim town manager to serve during that time, then in the discussion again that I had with the chair was that that should be a decision that the board is focused on making, relatively soon, so that there can be some discussion about the transition. Obviously, the budget process is going to be the major piece of the program that's going to be running essentially from late October through town meeting. So that was the rationale for including that. And also just out of recognition that each of these decisions, whether the board decides to make it this evening or to defer it, in the absence of having it on the agenda, the board cannot make a decision. So I think erring on the side of caution, again, through discussions with the chair, it seemed appropriate to include these items on the agenda, so if the board so chose, they would have the opportunity to make the decisions this evening. If the board chose to defer, then that would certainly be an option. But in the absence of having these items on the agenda, the board could not take those up.
Mr.
Right
Chair.
now, right now, what we're doing is we're having a solid conversation on this. We wouldn't have had the conversation if it wasn't on there. The reason I was suggesting that it was brought up this evening was simply because if we had voted yes or no, if it was a yes, we still have to negotiate what a contract perimeters would be while the individual is sitting in the town manager's seat. And if we went no, now we're gonna have to start looking for a temporary town manager, and the process is gonna take twice as long. So I was looking at it more like, we have the discussion. If we, not so much agree on it, but if we think that it should be taken care of tonight, so be it. If not, if the board votes not to, so be it, and we'll bring it up on our next meeting. But I don't wanna see this dragged out where one side of the committee is looking at the hiring of a town manager, and they're also at the same time looking at what we're gonna do with the temporary town manager. I think it's a,
Mr. Chair, I don't think we need to bring it up at the next meeting. I think we need to let the process be our guide, and that's to get the search committee on board and let's hear from them. As for the transition, if it's a department head or if it's the assistant town manager, there's not going to be much transition needed. We don't need to have a 3-month transition period, 2 weeks max for that. If we're doing from within. The budget process is handled by Brian Perry, the department heads. I actually spoke to Brian about the budget process. He doesn't have any problems with it, as he's not had, since we've hired him. He's been yeoman on the budget. He said the only thing that needs to be really concentrated on are the 2 major capital projects. I don't, he can certainly handle a presentation if it goes that far. And who's to say it's gonna go that far? I mean, we get the search committee up and running, they may have a recommendation in October, so that we're not even worried about it.
Right.
So let's hold off on these 2, and I'm sure number 9, that if these 2 are, we don't take action, number 9 would be tabled. And then let's get to the search committee where it should be, and let's move forward. But let's not bring this up
Yep.
every single meeting.
Yeah.
Let the process take hold, let it take effect. And then, once that's done and we get some feedback from the search committee, then let's take it up.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, I just want to say that you had mentioned that if we don't do this, we have to look to hire a assistant town manager. That's not the case at all. I think what we're all saying here, and I don't mean to speak for, but I think what we're trying to say here is we're not ready to do this now. Let's get this committee up and running for the town manager, get some feedback from them. We're in July. We have a lot of time to appoint somebody. And I think, and I don't know, but I think most of us do want to have an internal person in this position. So I don't foresee us going out to fill the interim position. But I think we need to let the committee get up and running and kind of get a timeline together. We gotta still put a charge together. I think it's too soon. It's not a no, it's a just let's wait and get this committee up and running. And I know Mr. Bendel did bring up, about, maybe after town meeting, and that was just a scenario we were working through. And it's not a bad one, but it doesn't mean that if a great candidate is presented in October and it's the right candidate, we're not gonna move forward. At the end of the day, if we hire the right person, that person's gonna be able to come in any day of the year and do the job, so.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
thank you. Just a couple things. I'm glad you mentioned the budget, because I brought that up as a concern last meeting, and I think all of us, our initial reaction was we're worried about the FY '25 budget. And after talking to Brian Perry myself, I feel a lot better about that concern that I had last meeting. But that's just an example of the research process that I'm going through that
Right.
takes time. I do want to acknowledge that I too spoke with Ms. Inman after the last meeting and had a conversation with her as well. But I also, my research too is, I think if we got to look at our charter, because we're using terms loosely, acting, temporary, interim. These are terms that are distinctly different, and I
It's
think
true.
we need to get a grasp on that, myself included. I'm not, and so I think that there's a lot of research. I've also been talking to other references about this potential board to consider item. But I am very glad, and I thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing this discussion, because I think just this discussion is healthy. This is the only time we get to work through these things, as you all know. It's not like we get to do anything in between. So it's going to take a number of these healthy discussions. Another piece of the research that I'm doing, that I'm sure you are as well, is the MMA website has a lot of postings for jobs, every sort of job, and a number of town manager positions, but not too many in Massachusetts, a lot of them in Maine. So I'm just looking at them and looking, some of them are posted for 4 weeks at a time, some of them are 3 weeks, 5 weeks, some of them are posted until filled. So I'm trying to get a grasp on what this entails, because we
Same.
haven't done this before. But again, this takes time, and I would imagine my colleagues are doing the same research. But I think, again, I can't go back to it enough. We have a unique opportunity, and that this team has been assembled so quickly that we ought to take advantage if they're willing.
Mr. Chairman? For one, I don't know that I want this committee recommending an interim town manager. I don't think that that's their charge, and I think any recommendation that they could make as an interim town manager could skew the system, if that's.
I don't have a problem with them not
I don't want to
doing it.
interrupt. What is their charge then? We haven't decided. They haven't
Well,
decided.
well-
We haven't-
But we could put it in the charge if we wanted to.
Right, well, I think the discussions that we've had on this, we haven't formally formed this committee. We're doing that hopefully tonight and giving them a charge. And my impression was is that when I asked my candidate, I said, hey, I'm asking you to be on a committee to find the next permanent town manager. That's it. Screen the committee, give us recommendations to assist in finding the new town manager, not an interim town manager.
So
I'm
through the
sorry, no,
chair-
I just have to respond. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, Mr. Carr, but I must have missed that, because when I asked, I'll reiterate
Same.
what I said at the beginning. I asked the gentleman, I said, I really don't know what I'm asking of you yet, because we haven't decided. So
Yeah,
may-
I did the same.
And through the chair, do you think your candidate would all of a sudden back out if we added the word temporary to it?
No, but I don't
Oh,
think,
okay.
no, but the thing is, Kevin, is that respectfully, I don't think that the committee should tell us or recommend us.
Well, the
an
committee's
int-
with all due respect, the
Yeah.
committee's gonna recommend a permanent town manager.
Right.
What's the difference if they recommend a
We
temporary
don't
town
have to
manager?
take we don't have to
Yeah, you
agree
don't
to
have
it,
to
we
take
don't have
either
to
one.
do it.
Right, no, what I'm saying is that if, again, going back to my little example, if they recommended Sally Smith as an example for interim town manager, and now that person may be in for a period of time, doesn't it skew the vote that, and again, it could work on behalf of Sally Smith, for example, it could work against Sally Smith because she could do a horrible job, and we could say, you know what, we're done. We're glad that, we had this free sample, so not free, but this sample to reject her. Right now, I mean, we have an assistant town manager that it sounds like everything I'm hearing is that whether we appoint her as a temporary town manager or an interim town manager, it sounds like by default, she's getting that role if we go beyond October 31st.
Absolutely not.
No,
It was
but
just said
Unless
by
we-
that was
Mr.
just, I
Fair
was just doing a,
that it's not by default.
that was information for me when I asked Attorney Fair about that. I just didn't know
Yeah.
if there was
And she-
something in
And she
there.
made it
And we
clear to
wouldn't do
me in a
that.
meeting that she would not take it by default,
Yeah.
so.
But I mean, I think we should, if we're not offering this job to her based on the
Tonight.
9 and 10, I think that we should, we should come up with, how are we gonna establish an interim position? I think we need to do that, because we can't keep saying, well, it might be Susan. Well, Susan's the assistant town manager, so she might be the acting interim town manager, she might not. And I think also that, with due respect to Mr. Kyra, I think that if Mr. Hull leaves, it's probably, my opinion is that it's not a 2-week transition to bring her up to speed to a town manager role in an interim basis, because don't forget, it's a domino effect where somebody's got to cover her duties, or, and other people are going to be doing additional duties, and you got to gear up. Is that overtime? Is that extra work? How is,
With all due respect, I would hope that Mr. Hull and his mentoring would be showing the assistant right along, since she's been here, about how you'd take over. I'm an administrator in Amesbury, and I can drop dead today.
God
and the
forbid.
person who's behind me can walk right in my shoes, because I taught her everything that needs to be known. And a good manager always does that, and I would expect nothing less from the town manager to our assistant, and right on down the line.
And Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I think we're making more work for ourselves here.
Yeah.
Let's, if I may, make a suggestion. Can we just reel this back in? Alls we're worried about tonight is whether or not we're going to take these actions, 7 and 8, or not, and move on to the thing.
Okay, first off, there's a motion on the table right now, correct?
And second.
In a second.
You can take a vote on that.
I
Mr.
would like to
Chair,
take the vote on that.
Yes, please. And it's, I'm sorry, Kevin, what was the exact motion? Just refresh me.
To take no action
No
on
action.
7
No
and 8,
action, okay.
period.
Thank
For
you.
7 and 8, correct?
Yeah, I did that so we could have a discussion, because,
Yep.
when you table something, there's no discussion on a
Right,
table.
right. Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. We have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor of tabling 7 and 8?
Taking no action on
Taking
Taking
no
no
action.
action.
That was unanimous, Mr.?
Unanimous.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, if I could just respond to a question that was posed by my colleague, Mr. West. Absent this discussion, which we just had, when are we supposed to figure these things out, right? I mean, we can't, if we don't have discussion, we can't arrive at the answers that I think we're all looking for, right? So I guess, thankfully, we had a motion and we had a healthy discussion underneath it. Absent that, we just show up and vote. There's no in-between, as we all know at this table, and residents know. When are we supposed to work all these things out? When are we supposed to decide what we should do if it's not right here, right now?
If I may, Mr. Chair, so when do you propose, Greg, to put 7 and 8 back on the table?
I think when this committee is ready to make the most important decision they're gonna make, that's when we're gonna do it. I just don't think it's July 31st.
So you want to wait until probably October?
I don't wanna pinpoint it because I don't know what's gonna happen. The
Right.
committee might come back and say,
No.
we don't wanna do that,
We
Greg.
can't date anything right now.
No, we can't.
I-
And if
But what I do know is that, look at other recent important searches that we've seen in this community. One of them I was involved in as for superintendent. Those went on for months. It's very important. It's not, in the industry that I work in schools, it can be an entire year. We've just seen temporary positions in the city of Lowell. I believe it was the town of Rainham, just appointed their fire chief, temporary town manager, until they can complete a search. on and on. As you do more research, you become more familiar with these things. This takes time. And, you know, if people want to accuse me of dragging my feet or to delaying of some sort, I would just simply say that we've met for a record 3 times in the month of July.
Yep.
And that we're taking this very serious, and that we're going to arrive at a very good candidate. That candidate might be someone who works here, it may not. But I think we're going to try to do everything we can to make sure this is transparent
Yep.
and to make sure it's thorough. We keep saying, all of us, that we want to do a thorough, great search. I don't know why we're being asked to put somebody in the, well, we've already tabled it, so I don't want to.
No, yeah, it's stable now, so.
If I can just, one quick comment. I was gonna say, Frank, I think, as far as, you know, we can't put a date on it, but I think that goes back to the committee. The committee comes to us and just, I'm gonna put a fake date on it, but let's just say they come to us, you know, September 25th, and they're like, you know what, we're nowhere close. Well, then I think we have to take action to get an interim in. Do you know what I mean? I think we put an interim in when we need to put one in. And no, we're not gonna wait till, you know, October 31st. But we'll get a status from the committee in due time, with enough time, 30 days, I'm making it up, and say, where are you? And if they say, there's no way, we're looking, just, you're gonna need an interim. You know what I mean? And then we can take the action. That's what I think. But I think the committee needs to be formed and get going and give us some feedback on, you know, what their action is with our charge in relation to finding a town manager. And I think then we could do that.
So,
Conversation's over on that now, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
No, that's
Voted
fine.
on it,
Yep.
it's done with right now. Gonna go to the board to consider number 9. I'm gonna recommend that, I'm gonna look for a motion to table that also.
I'll make a motion to table that.
Second? Second. All those in favor? Okay, now we're at 10.
I'll make a motion, just to get it rolling, I'll make a motion to appoint the individuals listed below to the town manager's screening committee and further establishing the committee's agenda for first meeting and scheduling their first meeting date and time.
Second for discussion.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if my colleague, Ms. Maselli, would be willing, I would just wondered if we should separate the two,
Yeah.
the first half of the board to consider. I have great confidence in this group. I'm thankful for their willingness. I think my colleagues and myself made great choices, but I'm a little hesitant to suggest when they should meet. I think that should be up to them, and I think that they'll let us know. I don't know, you know, it is the
Yep.
middle of summer, they may have
Yeah,
something going on.
I'd like to amend my motion. Amend my motion to move forward with the appointment of the individuals listed below to the town manager's screening committee and table establishing the agenda and first meeting and scheduling of their first meeting, date and time, and leave it up to the committee once they get together.
I'll second
Does
for
that make sense?
discussion.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
It seems to me that in order for this committee to meet, they can't decide on a date amongst themselves. There needs to be a meeting, and so what was proposed here was for the board to agree upon some potential dates for someone in my office to have available to them to call each of these individuals and say, are you available on, for example, August 7th, August 8th, August 9th, at 7 o'clock for a meeting, and then also, since they won't be able to meet until, you know, that first meeting, to propose an agenda which I think would include establishing a chair, establishing a vice chair, establishing a meeting schedule beyond the first meeting date, and perhaps establishing, or at least beginning discussions about the criteria to use in the selection of a town manager. But absent the board giving some direction on meeting dates, you're kind of in a perpetual circle.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hull, but I disagree. Mr. Fair, if I could ask you a question through
Go
the
ahead.
chair. If this group of individuals, the 9 screening committee candidates that we're gonna vote on, if an administrative assistant or someone from the town manager's office sent them an email and said, doodle poll, when could you meet, and individually, and they all got back to that administrative assistant or staff member with a meeting date that arrived at X date, is that a violation of the open meeting law?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, no, if it's, so long as it's limited to just scheduling issues and there's no discussion of substance, they do have to be careful about, I mean, if you limit it to just, if it's all organized through the administrative assistant, whoever's tasked to do that, and they're just responding back as one, then there's not involving others. That would be the cleanest way to do it and not copy all the other members. Just don't reply to all. But even if they did, it would just be a scheduling issue.
Okay, thank you for that, because that's my understanding of it. So
Yeah.
what I suggest is that we ought to just, you could throw out a bunch of dates on a doodle poll, whatever technology you want to use. Allow those individuals who are
To
very
make-
busy, doing what their lives and their jobs and other committees that they serve on or whatever, let them decide. I feel very uncomfortable saying,
I
hey,
agree.
you've got to meet on this date. If it's nice enough to them to serve for us, we're going to ask a lot of them, clearly, based on the discussion tonight, and that's the least we should do, because it doesn't violate the open meeting law.
Mr.
I was
Chair,
under the assumption anyways that what was gonna happen is, once we voted on this, that's the way it was gonna go out, that
Yeah.
we're looking for dates, and they were gonna just put parameters down on when to meet. Because they have to get, if I'm not mistaken, they gotta get sworn in by, Beth Lawrenson. And then they have to, set up a date to meet and inform their committee. But that's the impression is that it was gonna just be going out as, here's some dates, when can you meet for your first meeting?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
So how does, absent us giving some sort of parameter, like, let's say, just for argument's sake, that we'd like you to have your first meeting by August 30th, just, it's a month. What's the harm in doing something like that? Because the problem becomes, who sets the parameters for the date? There is no committee.
No, well,
So, I mean, if somebody from Mr. Hull's office,
Jennifer.
hold on, just if Mr. Hull's office called and said, we're gonna pick some dates when maybe room 9's open or something, I don't know. I mean, we recently had through, as you know, you guys recently appointed me to the Economic Development Committee, and they didn't have a new meeting date. So what they did is that Jane from the planning board sent out 3 dates, but she was she's a member of that committee. So there is no committee, so it'd be nice if we could,
no, well, as we just were speaking about, we're not gonna specify a date, but we're gonna give them a parameter within that we are hoping that they will able to meet and
Right.
get their committee moving.
well, I'd like to see within a month.
Within a month.
I don't see, is that,
I'm opposed to that, but that's fine.
Right?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, yeah, let the, again, as I said, let the process take its way, send out the poll, let them all agree upon a particular date, whether it's 10 days from now, 2 days from now, or 30 days from now, so that they're all together. But I guess to Mr. Fair, through you, should we, once the committee's formed, once a meeting date is established, since there's no chair at this particular time until they actually have a meeting, should we be posting an agenda for that date that they've selected so that it's similar to what we have now, very generic, roll call, appointments, communication, public comments and announcements and new business, just so that there is some sort of an agenda posted for them to meet and act on.
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, I mean, they do have to comply with the open meeting law. So in the absence of anybody spearheading that effort for them until the committee is formed, there's no chair. Typically, the chair is responsible for the formulation and posting of the agenda. So,
And I don't mean to cut you, and with that said, so when the doodle poll goes out, it will say, 6:30, 7:30 for a start time. So then, when it's all determined and put together by the administrative assistant and sent a letter to them that they've been appointed, you need to go to the town clerk's office to be sworn in, or you can be sworn in the night of the first meeting, I would imagine, if she's so available. Then we would put an agenda together similar to this with the agenda for a town manager, selection committee, the date, the room, and then just generic roll call appointment, just to get it started.
Right, they need something, they have to have an agenda.
Yeah.
And so what that agenda contains obviously remains to be seen, but it would need to cover whatever it is they're going to talk about at the meeting. So we would need some base level agenda at least for them.
So, Mr.
Chairman,
Chair, just,
Mr. Chairman, I'll interrupt the manager, thank you. I would imagine that at our next meeting, that we would have a board to consider item of the things we would be asking the committee simultaneously after they've had, maybe, they've selected a date, and we could come back on important dates, or a memo here that the committee has agreed to meet on X date. And I would imagine the first meeting will be brief, as just described here. The agenda will be short, just choosing a chair. And then we should say, okay, we've got a solid list of questions or suggestions that we'd like to pose to you, and then vice versa. And I would imagine they will have questions for us. They may have questions for us tonight, I don't know. But I think that this is something that should be on the next agenda, is for us to develop the charge. You know, there's been a lot of talk about what is the charge, and I think that is a very important exercise for us at the August 14th meeting.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. When you, because we have a couple, excuse me, of the gentlemen that have been recommended for the appointment, are we allowed to ask them any questions, or if they have any input, or with?
They don't,
No, not to, I just didn't know if that was appropriate or not, and they may not want to. I just didn't
I
know
don't
if
think they can because they haven't been sworn in yet.
Well, I didn't know if
Right.
maybe as,
Oh.
just.
Or just as
pub-
residents?
Just as residents, I meant.
I want to make sure it's right. I don't want to get my
I
head.
don't know. Mr.
off because
Attorney
I did something
Fair.
wrong.
Before we do
Yeah.
that, can I go back to the motion?
Yeah,
When, to you, Ms. Pacelli, when you
Yes.
said, you know, to establish a town manager, should we also include it to say temporary? Because we do want their input on a temporary.
yes, I think
Yeah.
it should.
Okay.
I disagree vehemently. I don't think we should have they should be giving us input on a temporary town manager.
Well, we can take a vote on that, I guess, Mr. West, right? So,
So are you
I'd make
amending
a
it?
motion to
Wait a minute, there's a
amend.
motion
Okay.
already out on.
No, I'm amending the
Oh,
motion.
I'm sorry.
He's, yeah.
To include it to say temporary town manager as well.
I'll second that.
All those in favor? Opposed?
And Mr.
And 3
Chairman,
to 2, pass it?
Mr. Chairman,
Yep.
just for public knowledge, we should probably, before we take a vote on these members, we should announce the members by name so that the public can hear the names if they're not looking at an agenda.
Well, yeah, well, now we are on 10, so it would be. But I see, let's take it out of order. We have,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jonathan Eaton, 78 Glen Road, speaking as a private resident. I recognize that speaking before you're voting on my potential appointment may be a risky call, but just a item to suggest as we're talking about what the agenda might be for the screening committee. I would suggest there has been mention of a charge. I don't know if there's a document that you folks have been presented with or you're discussing. I don't know if that would be on your next regularly scheduled meetings agenda to vote on that. But I am a firm believer that people do their best when they know exactly what is expected of them and what is not expected of them. If there is going to be a charge that is going to be voted on at your next meeting, I think that would be wonderful, and to give this committee some direction. If not, or perhaps in addition to, it might make sense to have the first meeting be a joint meeting with this board so that the members of the screening committee could ask questions so that that committee knows exactly what you folks want from it. So again, I appreciate you taking me out of order. I mean, I do appreciate the courtesy here. You folks have a very big decision in front of you, and I wish you all the best.
thank you. That was something I was gonna bring up, is a question of having a joint meeting so that we can go over all the charge. What-
I think we could ask Mr. Fear if that's okay to
It's open
have
meeting,
something
it's
like-
okay.
We're talking about a joint meeting after the committee has been named.
Established.
Yes. So both committees essentially list, would post a meeting, essentially as a joint meeting, and so long as it's clearly stated and both are listed on that, that's perfectly fine.
I'd prefer to see that to start out with. That way we could work closely with the subcommittee and possibly resolve any differences that we have in ideas in one setting.
I have a question.
Sure.
And Attorney Fair, this might be for you as well through the chair. Just on the charge, this is going to be from this board. We're going to create this charge. How are we doing that? Are we having a meeting? Are we all going to put our inputs? Just, again, this is new to me, so I'm not sure, how do we go about creating this charge? Do we do it, obviously, in a public forum like that? Do we all give input? How does that work? Or any, Kevin, if you have,
No, I was just gonna say, I appreciate that there be a charge from the Board of Selectmen, but I think the charge is on the selection committee. I mean,
Okay.
what more charge do they need? We're looking for a town manager,
Yeah.
right? Well, they need to post a job description,
okay,
or they need to post an advertisement for a town manager, and then they need to get applications for those that are interested in being the town manager. That's their charge, isn't it?
yeah,
Okay.
And just
I'm
time
kinda confused. And they can,
advertising.
and they can get together.
that's why I'm kind of
They're the-
confused
They're the
as well.
guys in charge of it, you know what I'm
That's
saying?
why I thought it would be,
As far as I'm concerned.
it would be terrific for both boards to work together on the first meeting.
That's fine.
So we all have input on the ideas that we want
Yeah,
and that they have.
I,
Is
yeah.
that funny?
I was going to ask Attorney Fair just for his input
Yeah,
on how that
Mr.
usually
Chairman.
works.
So there are certain things that are obviously just assumed when you put together a search committee as to what their task is. But there are going to need to be at least some basic parameters as to, what this board wants them to do. So for example, how many candidates are they recommending back to you? They have to recommend a minimum of 2, although I don't suggest, in order to be a screening committee, otherwise they're not screening anything. They've selected somebody and they just give you a name. And 2 is not a good number. I would typically say somewhere in the vicinity of 4 to 5, and that's mostly because you do have, once the committee reaches the point of determining what their finalists are going to be, somebody typically would make a call out to the finalists to let them know that, because you would give them the opportunity to withdraw before their names become public. When they're participating in the screening process, everything's in executive session, in terms of their names at least. Once they reach the finalist stage, somebody needs to reach out to them to let them know. And we've had situations where people will decide, because of passage of time, or maybe based on the early interviews, it's not a good fit for them, et cetera, you might lose candidates. So if you have the number too low, all the committee has left might be just 2 people for you to choose from. So if you have to give thought to, as a board, is how many names do you want coming back before you? Because of the way this motion is currently framed, where we're also adding a component for the temporary town manager, that's a slightly different process, potentially, depending on how you want their input and how you want that to be constructed. So you'd really need to kind of inform them as to what that looks like. Whether in fact you're advertising for that like you would be for the permanent job, or if that's a different process that you're looking for. And similarly, how many finalists are they looking for? Because they can't meet in executive session to be talking about screening candidates if ultimately they're just coming back to you with a name. There needs to be, they're giving you choices, and that's being presented to the board for consideration. Otherwise, that part can't be an exec session. They'd have to basically do that part in open session.
Chairman, I think Ms. Maselli brings up a good point. I think if you're okay with it, I'd just like to say now, in my mind, because we can't, work on a Google Doc or anything from now until then, I just want to put out one thing that I think is reasonable, and it's just my own opinion, is that I'd like to see the committee give us a final recommendation of finalists on or before May 1st of 2024. It may be well before that, but I just want to throw that out there because in my mind, I'd like to ultimately have the new town manager in position for July 1 of next year, meaning that they had to give 2 or 3 a month's notice to their current employer potentially, that they, but that kind of gives you an idea where I'm coming from. It may be, they may arrive at that far before that. But I mean, since we have to, I guess, has been mentioned, we have to pick some time frame here. I wanted to make sure it's very reasonable and achievable. And in my mind, I think, that's achievable. On or before May 1st of next year.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
One question that I know in a past, if I may, through you to Attorney Fair, I know Selectman Kyra had mentioned wanting to see, somehow see all of the resumes. And I think that's a good idea in practice because just because the screening committee picks, say, 3 finalists, well, we may or may not like those 3 finalists. But my question becomes is now if the other applicants, let's say there's 7 other resumes out there, it's tough to redact the resumes, given to us in a redacted format, because if the resume says, well, current position, town administrator of X town, well, now we know it's, Sally Smith, to reference my prior name. So how would we work that? Or do we? Can we get all the resumes, or are we restricted to only what the finalists become through the screening committee?
So, if I may, Mr. Chairman, through you, if the question is, can the individual select board members receive all the resumes, there's no legal prohibition against doing that. It wouldn't violate the open meeting law. What the board couldn't do is talk amongst themselves about any of the candidates outside of a meeting. That would really be the only restriction. Wouldn't be a problem with you receiving, from a legal standpoint, there's no issue with you receiving the resumes in an unredacted form. It's really a policy question of whether you want that. That's really for the board, is whether or not you want, depending on what your vision is for the screening committee and their role and what the select board members and their role would be,
Yeah.
whether those are consistent with your vision. And that's a policy determination for the board more than anything.
Okay, thank you.
Chair. I mean, I don't see, my opinion, and maybe, whatever others may feel, but to me, we have the screening committee. I don't want to see every single, I just want to see with the ones they want to give me. I don't want to see all the resumes. Because if we're looking at the resumes and choosing for them, I don't understand what the point is. That's just the way I feel. So however it falls, I'm fine with, but I'm just saying right now, I only want to see the ones that we're bringing in.
Right, and that's why I say, Mr. Chairman, it's a
Yeah,
policy
yeah.
decision.
Yeah.
It's not really a legal issue, it's more
Yeah.
of a policy decision.
I definitely want to see the ones that they've recommended, but I mean, I think one of the biggest things for this committee to do, obviously, is, and hopefully we'll get a lot of traction on this, is to weed out the ones we don't want to see,
Well, that's the other thing too, is if we're gonna ask, or we're gonna attempt to get all the applications, the resumes and everything, and we're gonna look at them and say, no, I want this one,
Right,
I want you to relook this one. I think it'd be an embarrassment to the committee,
absolutely.
and I wouldn't wanna see that. Grant you, I wanna know who the candidates are, but we're putting our trust in the screening committee. And we've got to accept what they say. And if they bring us 3 names, 3 applications, and we don't like them, they're going to go back anyways and bring us 3 more. So I can't see us doing that. I wouldn't want to embarrass the screening committee by saying all your applications are now going to be reviewed by us also.
It's a very strong committee, I think they'll be.
And I think with the strength of the committee, the candidates that are here, I believe they all have Wilmington at their heart, and that they'll move forward the process and bring forward the best candidates they can find.
Mr. Chair, it was mentioned earlier, perhaps by Mr. West, I think it was a good suggestion. Should we list the names, or perhaps do you want to read them off, those who may be listening or watching?
I'd be more than happy to read them off.
Yeah, I agree.
And I would suggest that in the names that are town employees, like the department heads, just for reference so that people know that what, like the director of finance, et cetera. A directors of finance.
Okay, the names that have been brought forward for the select board to consider are Michael A. Kyra, Michael L. Shampoo, John F. Doherty III, Jonathan R. Eaton, Sean Hennigan, Raymond N. Lepore, Brian T. Perry, who's treasurer,
He's finance director, town accountant.
finance director, Robert G. Peterson Jr., and Paul J. Ruggiero, the finance director for the schools.
Mr. Chairman, just in the spirit of transparency, was there a vote by the planning board and the finance committee for these appointments?
No, they were not. They were brought to their chairs, and the finance, Brian accepted it, and.
I think he's talking
Brian
about the
Terry.
finance committee,
Oh,
not
committee.
the.
Finance committee and planning board.
No. I informed John Doherty, and he asked that he wanted to take it. He's the chair. I asked Terrence,
Boland.
Terrence Boland.
thank you, and he refused it, and he recommended I just go down this list. And I contacted the next one that was on my list, which was Sean Hennigan, and he accepted. And it was recommended that we have someone from finance from schools, and Paul accepted it.
Well, he was mentioned by me. Paul and Brian were
Yes.
mentioned by me.
Yeah.
What I had mentioned in the motion was that a member from the finance committee,
Yep.
a member from the planning board be selected. So I
And-
thought that maybe they would have a meeting and amongst themselves select a member to serve in this committee. But that's fine. I mean, that's not, no, it's not a knock on the individuals from those two committees. It was just the way it was proposed to allow everybody that opportunity on the committee to say, yeah, I'll serve, or no, I won't. Okay.
Now, if I may, Mr. Chair, the vote as it stands is to form the committee for seeking out both a permanent town manager and an interim town manager recommendation? Is that,
I believe that's the way it's gone.
Temporary,
Yeah.
I believe.
Temporary.
Was the phrase, was the word.
Temporary.
okay.
Do I have a motion?
I just wondered.
We already voted on that.
Discussion, just wondered if through you to Attorney Fair, again, to my earlier point, we're using the words temporary and interim very loosely here. Could you
Good
give us a
point.
little guidance on
Cer-
it? before we-
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Chairman, the charter uses two different terms in two different contexts. So you have within the charter a temporary town manager, which is when you have a vacancy in the office of town manager. And that is what you are all talking about appointing a temporary town manager in the absence of a town manager. There is also another provision, acting town manager. That is something that the town manager has the authority under the charter to appoint somebody in a temporary absence or disability, or similar to, if Mr. Hull is going away for a period of time vacation, he may designate somebody to be acting town manager. They now assume the authority under the charter of town manager during that limited period. But you want to be using temporary town manager for what you're talking about.
Thank you for that. And also, I wondered if for the next meeting, if we could get clarification, I believe somewhere in the charter, and I could be wrong, but and when you mentioned the word acting, it reminded me that somewhere in the order of succession, for lack of a better term, that if there wasn't a manager or an assistant manager, that the chair of the board would actually serve in the capacity of the leadership role.
Well, if I may.
Go ahead.
I had it tagged in. So the acting town manager, the two provisions are very brief. So the appointment of a temporary town manager states that any vacancy in the office of town manager shall be filled as soon as possible by the selectmen. Pending the appointment of a town manager or the filling of any vacancy, the selectmen may appoint a suitable person to perform the duties of the office. And then acting town manager is the one that I mentioned a moment ago, where the town manager may designate by letter with a file with the town clerk, a qualified office of the town, to perform his duties during his temporary absence or disability. In the event of failure of the manager to make such a designation, the selectman may, by resolution, designate an officer of the town to perform the duties of the manager until he shall return or his disability shall cease. So that's in a situation where if the manager, if something happened where he wasn't able to work, but also hadn't designated somebody and was not in a position to do so, that's when that latter provision would come in. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Mr. Bendel, but.
It does, thank
Okay.
you, yeah, I think it's, so it's pretty broad in terms of the board's abilities, if such the occasion arose, that we could essentially appoint.
Yeah, there's no limitations on who you appoint as temporary, right?
Okay, thank you for that interpretation.
Mr. Chair, based on the motion and the second, I'm going to vote no. And the reason why is that I fully support the search committee for a permanent town manager. I do not support this steering committee, this committee, giving us recommendations on a acting, I guess is the now temporary town manager.
Temporary.
So that's, I just wanted to clarify when the vote comes, why I'm voting no.
I have a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Sorry.
That was already been done. Second's been done
Second
with
for discussion, I
yeah.
had a comment, if
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll yield to my colleague.
No, I was
Okay.
just saying that
Oh,
Mr.
thank
Bendel
you. Yeah,
said.
so my comment was that I actually have the opposite view, that, you know, if the screening committee comes back and says, yeah, we're not interested in doing that, then I would completely understand and respect that. But if they're watching this meeting tonight, as I suspect they are, then they might be chomping at the bit to give us input. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, I don't know. I've only spoken to the individual that I have appointed, and he so graciously agreed. So, I think that when a decision of this magnitude, if we have a group as fine as this one, in front of us so quickly, as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, because I can't say how impressed I am, how quickly they've been assembled, then we ought to at least pose the question. If they're opposed to it,
Yeah,
then
I agree with that.
let it be. But I think it doesn't hurt to ask them the question.
No? That's fine.
All right, vote.
By a voice vote, please, to appoint these 9 individuals to to establish a screening committee for the appointment of a town manager, a recommendation of a town manager, and also the possible recommendation of a temporary town manager.
Aye.
Kevin Curry, yes?
Greg Bendel, yes?
William Masella, yes.
Frank West, no.
Gary Palmer, yes. That's it. Do you
So,
have anything?
just to be clear, in terms of going forward, because there's a lot of discussion here about scheduling this first meeting, and the intent, as I understand it, is for the administrative assistant to send out some number of dates, or to, what?
No, through the chair, for the administrative assistant to send out the calendar of August and the calendar of September, and let them tell us the dates that they're available in.
Yeah, and I would suggest that those first possible date be after August 14th, because as just previously mentioned a moment ago,
Right.
it's at that meeting that we will develop a charge. So you would imagine that,
Yep.
I want to be mindful of, this is a fine group, I'm grateful that we can have them, but I'm also recognizing that it is the dog days of summer and the people are really busy.
Yep.
And we're asking a lot of them, and perhaps they're just not available. They might be on vacation next week, I don't know. So I want to be mindful of that, we want to be respectful of their time. So I want to be very reasonable in the request. So if we're looking for a range of dates, I would say give them everywhere from, August 15th to a month out from then. I don't,
Yeah.
let them arrive at a date that's available here and they can choose. If they want to meet right away, then so be it. But-
It's gonna be determined by them.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think we need a range.
Mr. Chair, I would say August 15th through September 30th to start. That would be my recommendation.
And then secondly, I know in terms of the discussion about the agenda, there was the suggestion that it essentially be framed in a very basic way, so that would not include specific reference, well, there was a suggestion that on the agenda, there be discussion about appointing a chair.
Yeah.
Was there the intent that the committee also decide upon their future meeting schedule? I know there was discussion about having it very generic, but ultimately, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Fair, but there has to be some measure of specificity in an agenda. And that decisions to be made by that committee, if they're known going into that meeting, have to be put on the agenda. So if the intent of this committee is to establish a future meeting schedule, then that should be listed as an item. If the intent of the first meeting is to determine or discuss criteria, that should be on the agenda. The items that are intended to be discussed should be on the agenda, and in the absence of having those items listed on the agenda, it becomes somewhat problematic having those discussions because the public was not forewarned. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, then we can just add in something to discussion pertaining to the selection of the town manager and temporary town manager, which will be all-encompassing in regards to how they move forward with their criteria. It allows them that latitude.
Unfortunately, Mr. Kyra, the way the Attorney General looks at those types of agendas, they would want you to be more specific than that, because that's just, I mean, I appreciate trying to make it broad so they can cover as much ground, but the AG would want to see you make it a little bit more specific than that, of what exactly they would be, you know, at least a more defined explanation of what they would be covering. But maybe for the first meeting, I'm not sure, based on the discussion I'm hearing tonight, that there's a sense of what beyond just organizing, setting up dates, and perhaps,
Potential criteria,
what's that?
potential criteria.
Potential
or just-
criteria in terms of what they want to recommend back to the board. Right, so you could put that down as one of the agenda items of, you know, criteria to consider for, you know, the next town manager. That could certainly be one of the criteria, and if we're doing the dual list, as well as for the temporary town manager.
And can I make a suggestion, Mr. Chair?
We also put in selection of chair and vice chair.
Well, that should be, I think
what I
that
was
was already
gonna-
mentioned, but yeah, the
Yeah.
organizational, as well as their dates of meeting as well, should be included.
Thank you.
That's what I was going to say. I would say just for agenda, they can do an introduction, then the chair, vice chair, secretary, and then go into the discussion.
Frank?
I just, through you, Mr. Chair, if I could ask Attorney Fair a question. I just want to make sure that we're not setting ourselves up for a failure from the get-go, in that, on that board to consider item number 10, it says here that we were looking for a town manager screening committee. Does that also cover a temporary or town manager screening as well?
I added it.
We
made
added
that.
that, we added that
Okay,
in.
it was
That
added,
in.
okay.
Yeah, we made an amendment.
I just want to make sure that that's fine, that amendment is fine to the agenda.
Yes, I mean, in my opinion, it's listed below to the town manager screening committee. That is what this committee
Okay.
will be doing, albeit they're looking at both a temporary as well as a permanent.
I just didn't want somebody to come in and cry, and say, cry foul on, and say, wait a minute, it wasn't necessarily on the agenda.
No, I think that's,
Okay, thank
that's
you.
sufficient for this purpose, for this vote.
And the other question, I think, to Mr. Hull, would we have a town secretary, somebody appointed to record the meetings and
They would appoint someone in the committee.
Yes, it is.
Well, so I've reached out, so these meetings would be covered by a member of the AFSMI 2 group, which includes the clerical staff. So I've contacted the president of the union and asked him to put the word out, and we do have a representative from who works in the treasurer collector's office that would be prepared to serve in the recording secretary role on obviously it would be time and a half basis.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a very important note because, and it was a great question. I had the same question. But I wondered if there was be a memo from the chair thanking, under communications, thanking them for being on the committee, as they know they've been, were voted on July 31st. And we want you to know that there'll be a staff member to assist you at the meetings and taking the notes. And I wonder, will there be someone that they can, whoever the chairperson is selected, would they then work, who would their point person be at town hall to communicate with? You know, for example, this board communicates with Beverly and the manager. Is there a point person? Would that be this Ask Me To person? Who would their point person be when they have a question about scheduling? And, I mean, we'd make somebody available, right? And we don't have to give out the name
Yes.
tonight, but.
Yes, certainly someone in the office, in my office would be working with them. Quite frankly, I think Beverly would assist them in terms of any scheduling and making sure rooms are available and dates are available and so on.
Any other questions?
Just one question in terms of the agenda. Is it the intent or desire of the board to also include as an agenda item for this discussion, potential establishing interview questions? Or would that be something that you would let them?
I think that's
that's
something
later.
that they would be able to, they'll sit down and work out themselves between the committee members.
You know, I almost envision one of the agenda items being next steps and what they believe should be on the next agenda, right? By then, they'll have a chair and who can develop the agenda, but, you know, almost one of the items is like, okay, what do we want to tackle first in this process? They know what the big question is, clearly. You know, what is the very next step? I don't want to suggest that you say, oh, I want you to tackle this right away. I think we've assembled this refined.
Can we maybe put something like, determine scope of committee? Is that broad enough?
I think we got it fairly well covered already with,
I think quite frankly, and it seems to me the board, select board as the group who is appointing this committee, it really should be your role to establish what the parameters and scope of work of this committee is. I mean, certainly if you want to get feedback from the committee, that's appropriate, but typically when a committee is established, it seems to me that the group that is establishing that committee identifies for them, these are the roles and responsibilities that you, as this temporary committee, should have.
To that point, Mr. Chair, if I could, I think in my mind, there's 4 major categories, and I don't suggest to know what the timeline is, but from my perspective, if this committee is so willing to give us feedback on these 4 things, it's number 1, an possible interim solution, temporary solution, possible. Number 2, the application process, posting an application process. Number 3, a potentially salary range, and number 4, the finalists. Those are the 4 things that if I had the ability to have that committee in front of me, I would say, I'm looking for your feedback on the application process and the posting timeline, temporary solution, salary range, and finalists.
Can I add one thing can I make a number 5, advertising?
Yes, I guess that's, yeah.
In the MMA, the Beacon, so that should be a number 5.
Mr. Chair?
we also, you all received this town manager search screening committee charge. This was just a sample to give us an idea and perimeters of where we should be going with it. I thought it would be useful in giving us some basic ideas on where we should go with it. And I just wanted to bring that up as just an example.
We're working on that next meeting, I believe, right?
Yes.
So,
I think one of the things that the search committee should have is a blank copy of the town manager review, because those are the items that we're reviewing the town manager on. So it'd be nice if they knew up front who we think, again, I'm saying a blank form, not something that from Mr. Hull. I'm just saying a blank form so that we'd know, or they'd know what the criteria we're rating a town manager on.
Well, I think that's a great reference point to provide them, in addition to the public document, which is the current town manager's contract.
Yeah.
Just so some reference material that could be provided for them. But I would imagine in the future town manager may have a completely new evaluation system, having been through the current evaluation system.
Also, I believe that once the committee meets, they'll come back to us with a lot of information that they want, that we
Right.
didn't think of. So I don't want to burden them too heavily right at the beginning.
And so if we're looking at number 11 here, Mr.
yeah.
Chairman, then right away, and I totally can appreciate that this is completely a draft, and I'm glad that it is. I wondered if, if are we going to use this for August 14th? Is it going to be, we have a chance to revise this?
I was using this as a draft, and then, assuming that on the 14th, we'd be going over it deeper, that we can make corrections and,
And through the chair, on the draft, I mean, we should, I think, give it to the search committee as a draft.
yeah.
Because they're going to want to tweak this themselves as well. Well, I mean, we can give them the charge of what to do, but they may come up and have ideas, something totally different from us as to how they want to make the approach. And I don't want to stranglehold them, into just A, B, C, D. They may have 1, 2, 3 to go in here, so that's mine.
Okay.
We get number 11 still, right? Did we do that?
No, not
We
yet.
didn't do that.
Okay, and, board to consider number 11 to establish a timeframe. Since we put off 7 and 8, 9, do you prefer that we put this off to another date?
Well, I think it's important, Mr. Chair, if I can, I'll reiterate my stance, but just if anybody had initial thoughts, I'd be interested in it, because I think, at some point, we do have to develop a timeframe, and I've been here saying, well, I don't know when that is gonna be, but at some point, I think we should hear when everybody's ideal. Like I said earlier, I'm okay with the fact that, as you can see, I almost feel like I'm stumbling along here, but at some point, we're gonna arrive at the right answers, and that may not be till the spring of 2024.
Yeah.
So that's why I threw that out there earlier. So I'll stand by that here for number 11, that I'm okay if this takes till the spring of 2024. I'd be concerned after that.
Yeah.
Because I do believe that a potential candidate may have to give 2-3 months' notice if they're coming from another community. Maybe they're not, but this isn't the type of job where you give a 2 weeks' notice somewhere. And so, I get it, this could take time, and we're asking a lot of the screening committee, and they're probably, maybe even regretting their choice after watching tonight, but I hope not. I really hope not, because I think it's a fine group, but this could take time, so I don't wanna pigeonhole myself to say January 1 or March 1st or this particular date, so I'm comfortable saying this. I'm comfortable saying that we would hopefully take a vote in the spring of 2024 for someone to be on board, July 1 to hit the ground running, but that's just
On
my
it
thought.
before. On it before.
Yeah, on it before.
On it before.
It could be before, well before.
Right, right.
Mr. Chair, based upon the discussion that you and I had, the reason that this was placed on here was some intent of getting a sense whether the board was looking to bring someone on board sooner, perhaps in January, February, thereabouts. Certainly, if that were the timeline, then the committee would, want to plan their schedule, the advertising, all those things are affected by the deadline. If the intent is to bring someone on board after town meeting, it's hard to say, but interviewing people in the fall and making a decision in the fall or November, December for a position that isn't going to be available until late May or mid-May, I don't know what the implications of that are. Certainly, town managers have to give a month or two of notice, in some cases more. Typically, that's outlined in the contract. But if, I think the intent was to get some sense of, is this an effort that's, you're looking to have concluded in this calendar year or not? Because that has implications for whether there's going to be a temporary town manager in place or not. Clearly, if the intent is to bring someone on board in a permanent capacity by the end of the calendar year or the very beginning of the next calendar year, then it may not be, that temporary town manager role may not be serving as long a period of time. If the intent is to bring someone on board mid-May or late May, then presumably the temporary town manager role is going to be in place for 6 months or so.
Mr. Chair.
I was, just 1 second, please. I was looking at hopefully having a permanent town manager in place in sometime in February.
Mr. Chair,
Um,
go ahead, Kevin. We're going to say the same thing. I know we are, so go ahead.
This is just a timeframe.
Yes.
This, with all due respect, Mr. Hall, it's just a timeframe. We may not need a temporary town manager. It could be done the next day that this talented committee meets. They may have
Yeah.
a person that day, or it could be done in February or March.
Right.
It's just a parameter.
Yeah.
It's just a timeframe,
Mr. Chair.
that's all.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that as well. I think this is, that date, and I agree with Mr. Bendel, to get somebody, a town manager in on before May 1st, I think that's kind of our drop-dead date. We don't want it to go any further than that. But if the committee comes up with valid candidates, we pick someone, they could be in November 1st, who knows, or June. It depends on, we want to get the right person in. To me, the dates don't matter. If we have to select a date, I think that's a good time frame, just given, the year. But, yeah, there's no time frame. If we get it in by the end of the year, it's the right person, great.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, and as Ms. Maselli said earlier as well, I mean, we're not in a rush. If we find out from the committee that there's difficulty come September, then we look at a temporary.
Right,
at that
right.
point. So
Yeah. It's just a
Yeah, but at least we get some ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you said, all they are is
date on
ideas.
something we have no
If I could
control
put-
over.
If I could put some context behind the date, I'm not just picking a date out of my hat, but I believe
Yeah.
our town meeting is right around
Right.
that May 1st date. I believe it might be May 2nd, May 4th,
4th.
thanks to the
Fourth.
moderator for that. I picked that because, I think that worthy candidates are gonna be focused on the job at task, at hand, whether it's in their community, our community, wherever. January, we know at the end of January will be the budget presentation to this committee, followed by a series of finance committees that some of these screening committee members are on. I mean, we're also gonna be pretty busy ourselves. Logistically, we're gonna be challenged. This is almost like asking, hiring a new teacher on the first day of school. They're pretty busy, or the coach on the first game of the season to interview for a job. I'm looking at a small window in a municipal
Yeah.
time frame that I believe is the right time for someone to make a move after that fiscal year's task has been completed, which for us is town meeting.
Right.
And then obviously the work continues every day of the year. I want to be clear about that, but they're not going to be swamped down by finance committee meetings, a joint meeting with the planning board and the finance, all these other things that they're going to be charged with in their day-to-day operation.
But they should hit the ground running. As soon as we get up our ducks in a row, advertising, candidates, everything should just start flowing. There shouldn't,
Mr. Chair? I understand everything everyone just said, but I'm more inclined with Mr. Holland that, to be honest with you, my opinion is that 10 minutes after it was publicly released that Mr. Holland, submitted his resignation publicly, people were already revamping their resumes. I think that's reality. I'm not saying that every candidate is revamping a resume, but there's resumes that are almost ready to hit the send button right now, my opinion. I think that if we did wait till town meeting, I guess what does that do? I mean, my personal preference would be to go the end of February or sometime in March, only because this way here, the new town manager could basically sit down at the desk, look at the budget, be part of the finance committee meetings, and hopefully we get a town manager beforehand. Because I'm just thinking that if all of a sudden it's town meeting day and we got a brand-new town manager and people are asking questions of the town manager, he or she is gonna say, "Yeah, I'm not sure it was that other person that basically you'd be having either the acting town manager, if that person's at town meeting, or the finance director answering the questions, not the town manager. I'd rather the town manager be in the process. And if it turns out that we're say we do March 15th, again, just spitballing the date, and the committee says, we're not ready. They come up to us at a March 10th-ish meeting and say, we're not ready. Then we can just extend the date. I'd rather give them a more inclined date, because some people that are looking for a job now may have already found a different job in April, May, or whatever time frame that we're giving them.
Mr. Chair, I think there's a misunderstanding. We're not saying that the job will start May 1st. We're just giving that as a parameter that we want someone in place by May 1st, on or before. So if they hire someone, we could hire someone December 1st.
Right.
We're not gonna hire someone December 1st and tell them they can't start till May.
No, I perfectly understand with
Yeah,
what
so I
you're
don't really
saying.
see what the point of putting a date anywhere. We're just doing it just because we have to. We could put next December if we wanted to. We could put this December, but we just figured to,
Also put two to be determined.
I mean, I don't care what date to me, whatever date we put on there has no consequence to me whatsoever, because it's about when we find the right person.
And I'm just thinking, if they're getting resumes over a month or a month and a half period, I'm just throwing it out there, and then another month to review and give us candidates, that's, hopefully they're giving us candidates in December, maybe
Right.
January.
But that's what I'm saying, the May
For a start.
1st date is just a date, it doesn't mean anything. So if we get somebody, if we put the May 1st date out there, and we get a candidate that we love, in January, and we say, yep, the job's yours, and they say, okay, I can start April 1st, they're gonna start April 1st.
Again, Mr. Chair, let the committee
Yeah,
Let's
chime in on
Exactly,
that.
there you go.
I mean, we're just doing May 1st. The committee may say at their next meeting, hey, we're going to make it, the deadline December 31st. Let them
Yeah,
give
let them
some,
come. I'm
some
fine with that,
input
too.
in this.
Yeah, I wonder if we could yield to the gentleman
yeah.
from Glen Road.
Mr. Eaton?
Mr. Chair, I just want to read from the inhabitant bylaws, Chapter 90, Section 21, committee reports, vacancies on committees. All committees shall report as directed by the town. If no report is made within 1 year of the date of the meeting creating the committee, it shall be deemed discharged unless in the meantime the town shall have granted an extension of time. So if you don't choose a date, you've chosen tonight to create a committee, then on July 31st, 2024, those of us who would remain would be discharged unless the town asked us to stay on longer. So I'm not going to speak for the entire committee. I'll speak for one person who was appointed minutes ago. I want to be done before that.
Yeah.
So I certainly will not be sitting on my laurels. To the point that was made about these people are busy, I appreciate that and take that as a compliment. It's inaccurate. And I will serve with all due diligence, and I am confident that the other individuals on the committee are not going to be sitting around and want to get to work.
No.
So whether you're choosing a date or not, honestly, I don't think it's going to really change how quickly we go.
Yes.
We would like the position to be posted. We would like to start reviewing applications, and we'd like to get to work. So I
Thank you.
appreciate it
Thank
again.
you.
So should we take no action on
No
number
action.
11? I'll make a motion, we take no action.
Second.
All those in favor?
All righty, there we go.
I hear a motion, yeah,
Public
I
comment?
have
Oh,
public comments?
Public comments. I'll be brief. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice night, thank you.
No, I thank you for the faith that you've put in, at least the two of us, me.
Name?
I'm looking at the list of names, and I'm fairly certain, and maybe I'll be proven wrong, but I'm fairly certain none of the people on the subcommittee have ever gone through this exercise before. Certainly, Mr. Kyra has been around government, but he's never been on the selection committee, unless I'm mistaken. I'm not sure. Kevin, do you know if I'm wrong about that? I don't believe he was on a selection committee
I
at
think
any
he was
point.
on the selection committee for Mr. Hull, but
Yeah, yeah, forgive me. So anyway, the point I guess I'm going to struggle to make here is simply that we're going to be kind of inventing this process, I think, when we start having our meetings. We don't have a template to follow because none of us have really ever followed this before. When we hired Mr. Hull, we did so. He was the assistant town manager, incredibly qualified. And before we went out and marketed and advertised for the job, we've confirmed that Mr. Hull, in fact, wanted the job. We wanted him for the job. We entered negotiations, and I was very gratified that we were able to come to an agreement on that. So we didn't have to go through this process that we're about to engage in. The reason I say all that is there are resources out there. I don't know where they are. I think MMA was alluded to a little while ago, probably has a number of great resources. Perhaps town council, sir, I'm looking forward to getting to know you. But I would ask maybe Jeff, if it's possible, or whomever the right person would be, to amass maybe some resources, some guidebooks or whatever we might be able to use on meeting one so that we can hit the ground running.
Just so you know, Susan Emmons has compiled a list
Great.
that we have already.
Perfect.
That we'll be passing along. You know, I know there'll probably be more information needed, but at least you'll have a starting point with what she put together.
I just want to try to avoid reinventing a wheel that maybe is already kind of out there. If there's some sort of a process or template we can follow that would make us more expeditious in the performing of our tasks. But that's all I wanted to ask. Thank you again very much, and we'll look forward to getting
Thank
back.
you.
you.
Thanks, Mike.
Through the chair to Mr. Hull, I'm going to assume the chair, maybe the committee themselves, will they have access to reach to Attorney Fair as needed? Or how does that work if they need some, or do they go through?
I think they should go through, should at least contact me to
Okay.
indicate if they have some questions, and then we can
Go from there?
go from there.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Moderator, you can only speak on an item one time.
Your time's almost up.
5 minutes.
Except to clarify or to clarify
You're
a
out of
point
subject,
or
sir, I'm
correct.
sorry.
I'm sorry? Yeah, all right, well, I don't see any police officer ready to haul me out of
Yeah.
here. So. Till then, again, I'm going to use the entirety of my time, Jonathan Eden, 78 Glen Road. Just a couple food items to think about as you prepare for your next meeting. You've included the recommendations for a temporary town manager in the charge of this committee. I'm just curious as to whether or not that would be a different posting, because I could see the possibility that that actually follows a different process for a screening committee, because there is actually a date certain where that individual should be named in advance of, because that individual would be starting upon the retirement of the current town manager, whereas the recommendation for a permanent town manager, while we would like to have one in place by November 1st, that may not be the case, just depending on how everything else aligns. So I'm just curious as to whether or not that would be a different posting or a different process itself. There may be some individuals that are interested in being a temporary town manager, but not the permanent town manager as well. I'd like to have some sense as what the ultimate deliverable is. Would you like a certain number of finalists? I know Attorney Fair had said that usually it's 4 or 5, and I can certainly appreciate the pickle that this board would be in if a finalist withdrew and you were left with maybe one finalist to interview. This board had that process play out to that point when Mr. Perry was ultimately hired as the finance director and town accountant. We had 2 finalists and one withdrew, leaving just one. We reposted the position, went through the interview process all over again, found one other finalist. Those 2 individuals interviewed before this entire board, and Mr. Perry was ultimately hired. But some sense as to how many names you want. I would presume that the screening committee would be conducting interviews, but I just would like some
Yes.
confirmation that that's actually the intent and desire of
Yep.
the board. And I would like to know, and I think, Mr. Carr, I might have misunderstood what you were saying about posting of the position as to who's responsible for what. Because if the board is responsible, if the select board is responsible for posting the position, I think that's great because you folks know better than any screening committee what it is you want the position to be, what you're looking for. Because if a screening committee is then coming up with a job description and then figuring out where to post it,
Yeah.
that might delay our ability to get the ultimate, I guess, initial logistics ironed out. So a criteria for how we want to assess candidates, interview structure, organization, and meeting cadence. So some clarity as to who's responsible for what and where the line of delineation is, I think would be helpful.
Thank you.
Chair, I'm feeling much more confident about my appointment.
Great.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Public comments?
public comments?
Any more? No? That was it?
Wait, do you want to get up again?
You're out of order.
All right,
No
that's it.
public comments?
Mr. Chair, I do have new business when we get to it.
There's announcements.
Announcements.
Announcements? We have none? And now new business.
Okay, we had talked last meeting, I had mentioned that I was interested in the MBTA Advisory Board
We'll
appointment.
discuss that on our next,
Okay, it's just wanted to get that on the agenda if that was,
it's already on there, I believe.
thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Bendel had something.
Mr. Chairman, new business. Mr. West, are you concluded?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just wondered if you just mentioned you have a draft agenda already. I wondered if, just to be crystal clear, kind of avoid what happened tonight, do we have any, what you anticipate to be on the next agenda so that we can, I mean, they were crystal clear. I think coming out of this, my takeaway was that at the next meeting, in addition to whatever business comes before the town, that as it relates to this, we would be looking at something like this document.
Yep.
To fine tune, to then deliver to the committee. Is that correct?
Yes.
So,
Is that this the one you got? Yeah.
and then it would be at that time that we would discuss that. So it wouldn't be, I just want to be clear, it wouldn't be board to consider this document. It would be kind of like a discussion around how we want that to look like. I mean, we have to do it in
Frame
open
it.
session. We're not doing anything till August 14th. So at that time, we'll be developing what we think should be on, come from this draft.
Yes.
Okay.
So again, to be clear, that draft charge document will not be listed as a board to consider. It'll just be listed under communications for consideration.
Okay.
Right.
And then we would give input into what we would like to see, or revised, or removed, added,
Yes.
and
Like I said, this was just, all this was
Gotcha,
a
gotcha.
draft, like it says.
just to be clear, final question here, takeaway. I just want to make sure Mr. Hull's comfortable. Someone from the staff is going to send out a doodle poll or something, email to this group of screening committee.
It'll
I
reference,
understood the
yes,
ranges.
August 15th to September 30th.
Mr. Chair, just, it seems like Mr. Fair wants to say something,
Oh,
but
I
it
didn't
wanna
should be
interrupt
maybe
anybody,
a
I
board
just
to
wanted to get your
consider
attention.
item.
I just want to make sure, Mr. Chairman, that whatever you're listing on the agenda relative to the search committee's charge, that just be clearly identified on the agenda what exactly it is you're doing. So if it's to discuss and
Create a charge.
and create a charge for the search committee, for the town manager search committee, that's fine, that's pretty detailed, that you're coming up and discussing what their charge is. But just wanted to make sure that we're listing in a way that, so that it's not, because this board has particular, I guess, tags that you put on your agenda, board to consider versus discussion. From an open meeting law standpoint, that's more of a local practice than it is an open meeting law requirement. I just want to make sure whatever it is, that however you list it, that it's clear to the public that you'll be discussing and potentially voting on a charge for the town manager search committee.
So we could put down, discussion on, town manager search screening committee charge
Well-
or creation.
Just to be clear, so typically when there are decisions to be made by the board on particular items, I mean, certainly they're, under the category of appointment, there are instances where someone comes in and makes a recommendation. We had the Public Works Director come in not too long ago about turf fields, and the decision was made by the board to go in a certain direction, so that was conveyed in terms of the appointment in the discussion. The other place where, under the agenda here, it's signaled, if you will, that the board is being asked to make a decision is board to consider. So if the intent for the 14th is for the board to make a decision about the recommended charge, then it probably would need to be under board to consider as opposed to just a communication. A communication is typically an instance where I'm providing the board with information about something that has come through, either correspondence that's come through or an issue that I'm reporting on, and there's not an action that the board is being asked to take. So if the board is not looking to take any action on the charge, then I can put it under communication. If the expectation is that the board is going to make a decision on framing or modifying the draft, then that would be a board to consider item.
Yeah, and I thank you for that, because, you know, I'm trying to, with all due respect to the manager, you know, it was at the last meeting, at one of the comments I have, why don't we ask the assistant town manager as a courtesy if she's interested? She wrote to all of us and said she was interested, and then we jumped to right to vote for her, yes or no. And so what I'm trying to avoid is, you know, we didn't even have a chance, well, fortunately tonight, thanks to the chair, we did have an opportunity to discuss that. But I'm trying to avoid, you know, yes or no on this draft at the next meeting, right? And so that's the reason for my question, is I just want to be, you know, I'm looking at the last two meetings, we've tabled now 4 or 5 of the items each time, you know, and I think it was the right thing to do. But I'm trying to, try to stay hyper-focused on what we're supposed to do. So I appreciate what I'm hearing from you, because it sounds to me that this will be the only thing that we're voting, potentially taking up as it relates
Pertain to the town
to this town manager search.
Yes.
In addition to whatever business comes
Yeah.
before the town. Okay, because, you know, some of these other things, quite frankly, I was surprised at tonight after the discussion from last meeting. So I really appreciate you clarifying that in
So-
advance of August 14th.
So it would, again, just to be very clear then, this item, with regard to the charge, would be taken under board to consider in the event that the board wanted to make a decision about either modifying the document or providing it to the screening committee. Because in the absence of putting it under board to consider, if it was simply a communication, the board could hear about it but wouldn't be able to act on it.
Thank you for that, because I don't have to remind you that usually what we have is an appointment where it's a discussion about that, then later on in the meeting, it's a board to
Right.
consider it. Oftentimes, they're taken up out of order. I think we've
Right.
done that recently. And so, in my mind, I would envision a discussion with a very specific task, so that we're in compliance, followed by a action item, which is a board to consider on that later in the meeting. I guess the only question there is if there's significant change to what's been proposed as a memo, that's not a, okay, we're on the clear.
No,
Okay.
yeah, Mr. Chairman, no, that's just a draft for you all to consider, that you're not married to
Thank you.
that in any way, shape, or form. You could come up with your own. I mean, essentially what I'm hearing the board wants to do is at the next meeting is consider, development and a vote on the charge for the town manager search committee. I think that's specific enough to
And
define.
hopefully vote on it, right?
Yeah.
As I said, discussion and vote, a consideration or formulation and vote on.
Thank you.
In the end, if you end up talking it all through and you're not ready for a vote on it, you don't have to vote on it. But because of how you tend to list things, that's why I raised the issue with your different tags. If you want to actually potentially have a vote, you should be listing it as one of your board to consider items, because that's typically how you list things on your agendas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
So move, all those in favor? Good night, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Have, this